Our reading today is from the first chapter of the book of John. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." And Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. "Well, come and see," said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. And Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." And Jesus said, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. But you will see greater things than that." And he then added, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." The word of the Lord. So this is a new series that I'm beginning called They Walk with God. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do series. I'm only out here once a month, but I'm going to try, okay? And that is the idea. Have you ever found yourself saying to yourself just privately, maybe in your mind, how different your life has turned out than you thought it was going to be? Compared to where you were 20 or 25 and what you thought you were going to do and what you thought you were going to accomplish and where God was going to take you compared to where you've ended up. It's very different than usually how we thought it was going to be many, many years earlier. And that is, we have the novel of our life kind of planned out, how it's going to go. We may even have it written. And then suddenly the divine author of all of creation comes in and makes his edits inside the novel. And I guess the question I'm asking is, when the edits happen, how do you and I react? Do we react with fear or faith? Do we have anger or is it trust? And maybe even, I think an even more important question is, do we turn away from God or do we turn toward God? And I think what I'm trying to do through this series is for us to discover and choose the latter. That in times when we do not understand and life does turn out different than we thought it was going to be, we still choose to run to the Master. And what is so remarkable when I kind of begin to develop the series is about They Walk with God. It chronicles the life of so many people we find in this book who very often faced what you and I face every single day. Because this book is it's just packed of personalities and profiles written to us to see their examples of how they made it through. And this morning we are looking at two people, both Philip and Nathanael, we heard in this passage earlier. Two people, I think, two disciples, really, in my opinion, who were many times forgotten by many of us, and yet were remarkable in their stories. We know from extra biblical stories and historical accounts that both of these disciples died martyrs. Nathanael was the one who was responsible for getting the gospel into India. Philip, there's two Philips. This Philip is long believed to get the gospel into Greece, into Syria. And yet both of them, in the end up being martyred for the one they were serving their lives for. They refused to renounce the gospel. And I guess the question I'm asking this morning is if we're going to look at Nathanael and Philip, but what would cause Nathanael to say at one point, can anything good come from Nazareth? To a short time later saying, not only am I willing to live my life for you, but if I have to, I'll lay down my life for you. Why such a dramatic change? And I found myself, when I got into this passage, I found myself realizing that this passage, in some form or fashion, the gospel has repaired my life. And my hope is to kind of show that here this morning. And that is that for the longest time, I was very confused, and I could not make sense of trying to connect the dots of my life when I was in the present. And I could not understand in many cases that why God allowed me to fail so much, or in some cases to even be humiliated, and why it seemed in many cases, I know some of you can identify this, it seems like so many of my friends I'm close to, everything they touch turns to gold, and mine is a pile of nothing. And I've discovered now, looking back, that you cannot connect the dots when you're in it, or even looking forward. You can begin, the longer you walk with the Lord, the longer you walk with Christ, the longer you're hand in hand with Him, you can look back over your life and you can see where God used those moments in your life to connect the dots that makes your life, in some sense, with God's artistry, beautiful. Looking back. And I think this is often the case with not only us, but with history itself. You can look back, it didn't make sense at the time, it wasn't working, and yet looking back, you can see how God's sovereign hand was moving in and over things. And I'll just give you an example, because tomorrow is July 4th. If my math is correct, 246 years ago, our nation was born. And when you looked at the improbabilities of how this nation came together, it's just so improbable. And I was struck by watching it was a panel discussion, just two men, 3 or 4 years ago in Washington. They were two historians, Joseph Ellis, many of you know, the great historian, and a man named Richard Brookhiser, who is a writer for The Atlantic. And they were kind of giving different viewpoints of how our country was founded. And Joseph Ellis made something that has stuck with me since since I saw it 3 or 4 years ago. But he said, when our nation came together and it was founded, we became a republic. And around the world, that was seen as an absolute laughingstock, because no republic of any size had ever lasted. The only way republics could even last, it had to be a very small group of people and a very small landmass. So the fact that we were trying to create a republic with a huge landmass and a huge group of people was just unthinkable at the time. And how did that happen? How was this republic accomplished? Well, first they had to win a war of independence. And the world, up to that point, there had never been any country in the world who ever fought for their independence and ever won anywhere in history before. Never happened. Never done before. And this is what I remember Joseph Ellis saying. At the time, the British Army and their naval forces were the most powerful military force on the planet. There was not even one even close to them. And he said, looking to the audience, he said, I want you to ask yourself this question. And this is what I remember. He said, how many wars have the British Empire lost between 1750 and 1950? He asked this to the audience. How many wars have they lost, the British Empire lost? He said, one. One. Here. The only time it's ever happened. And here we are, over 200 years later, and we still long endure. And you could not make sense of it when you were at the time. Only looking back, you can see how The dots were connected in how we are still standing. Which brings us to this passage this morning. You have here two men, both Philip and Nathanael. And my hope this morning is to compare and contrast these two men and draw out what I believe we're supposed to see here. So I'll just say a couple points about Philip. One here that it's just very easy to miss, but I did not see it until this week. Isn't that amazing? I've read this passage probably hundreds of times. But it says that Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Come and follow me." Finding Philip. Finding Philip. So often we think we are finding God. I have found God. If anything, the scriptures seem to support the other way around. God found us. And my guess is if you and I were to look back over the course of our life and we were to admit God was always right there. He was always right there in our shadow, following us. Just like it says there in Psalm 23, surely your goodness and mercy have what? Have followed me all the days of my life. So it's not so much finding God, it's acknowledging he's always been there right next to us. The other thing here I think it's interesting is that it says that God used Philip to take Nathanael to Jesus. And God will very often use other people to bring that person to himself. Which means the lesson here is that you and I, we could very much be a Philip for someone's life. Maybe it's only one person, but that person will live into eternity because of our faithfulness to God. And Philip sees Nathanael, and he tells him, "We have found the one whom Moses and the prophets wrote about." And the commentaries I read both seem to say this seems to suggest that the fact that Philip and Nathanael could both read tells us they had to be somewhat educated to be able to do this. And the fact they seem to know the Old Testament prophecies also seems to suggest that even more so. And which is why, by the way, when Philip says, "I want you to come and see this man, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." And you know Nathanael's response, remember? Nazareth? Seriously? Nazareth? Can anything come from there? Now, just to give some reason behind that, is that, first of all, it just didn't make any sense to him because he knew a little bit about Nazareth. I think I've looked at the census data. At that time, there were something like 480 people from Nazareth, which would not even qualify as a one-stop-light town. I mean, in other words, it wouldn't even have a Walmart there, okay? So he's like, wait a second, that's in the middle of nowhere. And it'd be like suddenly saying, we have found the next great candidate to be our president. I mean, someone of incredible credentials. Where are they from? Hardyville? And people from Columbia and other bigger places, and really, like, where? No, Hardyville's a beautiful place. Don't come and lecture me after you're from Hardyville, okay? But the idea, it just was the middle of nowhere. But even more importantly, because Nathanael knew the scriptures, as soon as Philip said, well, he's from Nazareth, he would automatically have said, Nazareth, wait a second. If this is whom the law of the prophets have talked about, we know that the Messiah is not coming from Nazareth. We know it says the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. Therefore, it cannot be him. And that's why he says, I want you to come and see. But even, I think, just as important, and that is that the cousin Nathanael knew about history and he knew about what he observed around him. It's not at all, I think, improbable to think he absolutely would have thought this. And that is historical scholarship has taught us at this time in the first century in the Roman Empire, when Jesus comes onto the scene, there were already literally dozens of messianic movements before and after the life of Jesus. And Nathanael and Philip both would have known that in almost every single case, when this messianic leader shows up on the scene and begins to talk about revolution and begins to talk about a new kingdom. In almost every single case, that leader was gathered up by the Roman authorities, tried in a matter of days, weeks, sometimes as late as a month, was executed publicly. And in every single case, once the Messianic leader died, the followers scattered. In a matter of weeks and months, the movement died. In every single case except one. This one. But Nathanael couldn't make sense of it then because he couldn't connect the dots because he's right smack in the middle of it. And I think what's amazing about here is what would cause him to go from Nazareth, seriously, Nazareth, to suddenly saying, "You are the Son of God, and I'm willing to live and die for you." And I think we should ponder this. Notice what Philip does here. He brings Nathanael to Jesus. This is easy to miss here, but I think really important, and that is that Philip is basically telling Nathanael, I want you to move away from your preconceived idea of what you think God needs to be like and what his other followers look like. I cannot stress this enough, how important this is. And maybe because in God's favor, God's providence in my life, at least has given me the ability to still be plugged in and connected to a lot of unbelievers. And thankfully so. And I get into conversations all the time with people who are outside the church for one reason or another. A lot of the reasons are justified. They'll say privately they have real problems with the church. They have real problems with Christians. They don't like what the Bible teaches about this. They don't like. And what's so interesting, though, is in the conversations, if I know them well enough, I will say, okay, well, tell me about Jesus. And very often they really don't know a whole lot. The only definition they have of him is what they see from Christians behaving badly. And so what I always tell them is, you don't need to look to me. You don't need to look to them. You don't need to look to the church. You need to look to Christ. He is our model. He is our example. Go read his words and let's talk about this. And very often, if they do, they are dramatically changed. And reminds me of something that was taught to me in seminary. I've talked often about Dr. Tim Keller, one of the great influences on my life. He taught a class. I remember it was an hour long. He taught a class on the rules of preaching. It was just a gold mine in listening to him talk for an hour. And I've carried these for the last 20-something years. And I remember one of the ones he said, and believe me, I've had to remind myself of this on a regular basis. Let me put it up here, is that pastors are not the heroes of their own sermons. Now, let me explain this, okay? What he's saying, and this very often happens, and I've certainly done this, hopefully not deliberately, but somewhere we'll go, I will point to the great things I've done during the week, this month, this year for God. Oh, there was someone I shared the gospel with, and they became a Christian because of what? My boldness and my being courageous. This person was in need of money, so I wrote them a check out of money I didn't have, and you leave here going, wow, Jonathan is so great. I'm the hero of my own sermon. And what Dr. Keller says is, Jesus is always the hero of every sermon. Every sermon. So you don't leave here saying how great the pastor is. You leave here saying how great God is. So the point here is, and what Philip understood is, just bring people to Jesus so they can see him. And I'll put the pictures up here. That this man, with these stories and with that message, has gathered billions of people to himself and changed their lives for all eternity. And this is the essence of what Philip is telling Nathanael here about Jesus. He is saying to him, he is like no rabbi who has ever been or ever will be. So I want you to come and see. And so Nathanael comes and meets this man. And when they meet, in part of the conversation, I'll just go into this backwards, Jesus says something very, very cryptic. Let me put it up here. He says, "Truly I tell you," he's saying this to Nathanael, "you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Now, what is this all about? Well, because Jesus knew Nathanael, just like he knows us, and he knew that Nathanael would have known the Old Testament, he's referring to a story in Genesis chapter 28, where Jacob had a dream. He's on the way, he's had this dream, and suddenly he has a vision of heaven. It's called, you've heard it, you remember the story? Jacob's what? You passed, okay. Jacob's ladder, the staircase, the steps. It's a ladder that goes into heaven. And it says concerning this, Jacob saw a stairway resting on earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Now, what is happening here? Well, people in the ancient world, we see this all over the place with archaeological discoveries, were for centuries and really thousands of years were trying to build these great edifices to God because they believed if they could build them higher and higher and higher, they could reach the gods. And so I'll put the picture up here. They built what these things called ziggurats. And these massive monuments built in ancient Mesopotamia. And people came from everywhere, and they would climb and walk these edifices as they ascended to God. And as they ascended, they would say prayers, they would offer sacrifices, they would make penance. They were kind of rites of purification. But the point is that everybody understood is you climbed. You had to ascend to get there. And cities were built around these ziggurats because if you had a ziggurat, you were an important city. It meant you had access to the gods. And what caught Jacob so off guard was this was not man ascending to God. I'll put the next picture up here. It was God coming down to man. God coming down. God descending. And no one had ever seen anything like this. Because Jacob believed like everybody else, the way you get to God is you have to ascend. You have to work. You have to do these things. The way you make it is you have to build your life to get there. And this is what most religions have taught. If you want to be right with God, you better obey these rules, you better jump through these hoops, you better say these certain prayers, you better earn your way, you better build the staircase to get there. And think about it. The great religions of the world have taught this, okay? The five pillars of Islam are steps to God. The 10 Commandments are steps to God. The eightfold path of Buddhism are ways to reach enlightenment. The paganism idea of offering enough sacrifices to the gods to reach Valhalla. But look what the passage says here. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it." And he says, what an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. And just as quickly as that heaven opened up, it closed. And Jacob awoke from this vision and wondered if he'd ever see another way to get and access God again. And then centuries later, along comes Jesus Christ. And let me put the passage up here. He says, heaven has opened up again. And the angels are ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So what is happening here is the ladder, the steps, the ziggurat. Jesus Christ is saying, I am that ladder. I am the steps. I am the staircase. I am the ziggurat. If you follow after me, you will get there. And what astonished Nathanael even more is that Jesus communicated something here that had to be supernatural. as they approached him. Because as they approached him, Jesus says to him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." In other words, what's being communicated here is Jesus Christ, he knew Nathanael's heart. And everything I've read seems to say this. This is not a nationalistic mention of who he was from being from the Jewish nation. This is more of a religious one, and that is Jesus is saying to here, I know you are truly trying to do the right thing here. You are an honest man. You are not trying to fake your way to God. You're not trying to hide, you're not putting on a facade. You're not trying to be fake. You're trying to be real. Here truly is an honest man. You're not pretending here, Nathanael. And part of coming to Christ, we heard it in those words of purity. We come to him with our hearts open. Our desires are known. We're not trying to be something we're not. We just admit, God, I'm broken, and I cannot make it alone without you. Jesus knew Nathanael before they even met. And when we come before God, it's simply saying, I'm not going to fool you, Lord. I know you already know me. And I've often said, and I believe that God accepts us just as we are, but he loves us enough never to leave us where we are. He's taken us to somewhere greater, somewhere better, somewhere special. And Jesus' greeting here not only captures Nathanael's attention, but it's also, I think, penetrating insight, because what truly caught him off guard and why Nathan was absolutely stunned here is Jesus seems to communicate to him that he knows Nathanael. And Nathanael basically says to him, have we met previously? I mean, how do you know me? And the answer Jesus would give him would change the course of his life. He says, I saw you. I saw you while you're still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Now, no one knows what he saw, but it had to be so dramatic, because Jesus is not saying here, making some guess of some generality, He's saying something with such penetrating insight that it must have been so dramatic that Nathanael goes from Nazareth to suddenly saying, I am willing to die for this man. And I'll tell you something. Many people have tried to say and guess what was going on here. But I know this, that in many of our lives, we know when God seems to speak into our lives and seems to know something that nobody else knows, we know this has to be from God. And this is what happened with Nathanael. And I want to give an example of this as we're coming to a close. One of the great blessings of the last couple of years for our family, personally, I'll put the picture up here, is the series, The Chosen. It's the story that has been fun-crowded by the world to tell the story of Jesus Christ and those who knew him. And, I'm always very careful about what they call eisegesis, reading into passages of something that's not there. But I have to say, I found this series immensely impactful in my own life, and even more importantly, my own children. If they have watched this series, they are reading the Bible like crazy because they're watching this series. And, of course, in the second season, they presented Nathanael's life. And they go behind the scenes and they try to say, what could cause him to be so dramatically changed under that fig tree when God seemed to know that he was there? And they go into that his life had fallen apart. That everything he tried to do to build things for God collapsed. And he couldn't make sense. And he said, "What do you see me, God? Do you notice I'm here?" And he was at the end of himself when Philip shows up on his doorstep. And so I want to close by watching this. Let's watch this. Do we have it?
Yes.
Did someone die?
Yes. Was it sudden?
I think it was a long time coming for him.
You're ruined, you hear me? It's over!
But it felt sudden.
Tell me about him.
He was an architect. It was what he wanted to be his whole life.
You're in no position to make demands. You're lucky enough to have this
That's why
job.
I have to demand what I need, Leontis.
He came from
Do
nothing.
you know how hard I've worked to earn a Roman commission?
Worked his way up.
As a Jew.
Loved God. This was done for you. He wanted to build synagogues eventually. One with colonnades that sing. Parapets that practically pray. Vaulted halls that draw the soul upward to God. That's what God made him for. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. So he thought.
Daniel!
He sounds like an ambitious guy. What did he die of?
Hey, Nathanael, it's me, Philip. Daniel!
Hubris. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my distress.
I thought I knew where God was putting me to.
Incline your ear to me. Yeah, answer me speedily in the day when I call.
You don't know what your impact was or will be.
You'll have a good idea what it'll be. A cold day in Gehenna before they hire another Jew. This was done for you. Do not hide your face from me. Do you see me?
Your whole life, you've wanted to serve God, the King of Israel. But I know you. You don't mess around. I promise you will not regret it.
Rabbi!
John sent me to someone else. This is my friend, Nathanael.
Yes.
He's like no rabbi who ever has been or will be.
I have known you long before Philip called you to come and see.
What is this? How do you know me?
When you were in your lowest moment and you were alone, I did not turn my face from you. I saw you under the fig tree. Rabbi. There it is.
You are the Son of God. The King of Israel.
With all due respect, Nathanael, I know you're a skilled architect, but this thatched roof won't keep the rain out. That's the point.
But one of the great things about you is you are a true Israelite.
Vegetation provides shade from the sun during the day.
And if a few raindrops get through, it is a reminder of our dependence on God.
Yes, Nathanael, the beauty of this booth is itself an act of worship.